everybody. It's Laurie White, president of the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, and we are back again today, episode number 120 of Chamber TV, and we have a great topic queued up for you all this morning, one that no doubt everybody has to think about in some way, shape, or form, whether you're an executive, a manager, whether you're a line worker, no matter the role, you are in sales, okay? Everybody's in sales. And for some folks, the idea that they're in sales actually probably, creates sends a shiver down their spine. But today we're going to unpack that. We're going to see why that is. But more importantly, you're going to walk away at the end of this hour with some tools and some tricks and some hacks to put in your back pocket so that you could be and will be the most effective salesperson that you can be within your own enterprise. And today we have a nationally recognized sales trainer, best-selling author with us today to curate this conversation. He's going to break it down for us so that we all can get comfortable with the notion that we're all in sales and we all can do a better job moving the needle on that front. We are live today on Facebook, we are live on Twitter, and we are live on YouTube. We would love your comments, we would love your interaction, we would love your feedback. If anything pops up in your mind that you want to pose to our expert today, Allan Langer, we will be able to see those questions in the chat. We invite you to do that, and we will get your questions answered. So with that, let me introduce our expert, Allan Langer. And Allan, it's so great that you are with us today, and you're willing to share some of your secrets and your tricks and your hacks. And you are an expert. You were telling us just before we began the broadcast that you've done 100 of these sales training presentations within the last several months as we've all been taken to this virtual environment. So how are you doing today, Allan? Great to see you.
Good morning, Laurie. How are you? I can tell you've done this a time or two. So it's really good. I got a little bit of an echo, so I'm going to see if I can adjust my thing here. I've done in the pandemic era. I've probably done, I have my own podcast, so that's number one. But I've probably done 150 or so webinars, seminars, talks, things like that. So, and it's happening because people, they're afraid of sales to begin with, and they didn't know how to sell when the pandemic hit. So it was another layer of trepidation when it comes to selling.
Sure. So why don't you take us through some of the material that you've prepared for this webinar, and let's react to it afterwards. So I'm going to turn it over to you to start the show.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to share my screen, and again at the end, pop in some questions while we're talking, and Mike on backstage will curate those, and then we'll answer all the questions when I'm finished with my little chat. So let me just, hopefully the share screen will work. Share. Okay. Beautiful. All right. Everybody can see that, I'm assuming. Okay. So the title of the talk is let's talk about sales, because that's what everyone thinks when they talk about sales, or when they mention sales, or when they have to talk to a salesperson. So I always start my presentation with a question. I have a question for everyone who's listening. Do you like meeting with or talking with a salesperson? When I was writing my book, I was doing some research, and I wrote my entire book in a coffee shop in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. And during a 2-week period, I asked everyone that walked in the coffee shop that question. Do you like meeting with or talking with a salesperson? Are you ready for this? Every single one of them, all 231, said no. In response rates, that's called 100% response rate. But in the negative, there wasn't even a, well, sometimes or a maybe. Everyone emphatically said no. So I started to wonder why that is. and you start doing research on it, and you know, you can almost sum it up in a quote that Woody Allen said, which is one of my favorite quotes ever. Woody said, "There are worse things in life than death. Have you ever spent an evening with an insurance salesman?" This is the perception that's out there. This is what all of us in sales have to overcome when we're ready to meet with a potential client. Nobody wants to meet with us, even when they need our product or service. We salespeople are almost like necessary evils. You know, we've all been to the car dealership. We're like, oh, we need a new car. I have to go to the car dealership and talk to the salesperson. We need a new mattress. I got to go to the mattress store. And I hope the salesman stays in the back so he or she doesn't come and talk to me. So how did we get to this position? And it's always important to put things in context. You know, we're here for a reason. Why are we here? And once you understand that, it's easier to address it. And what I mean by here is it's a fear that we all have. What basically meeting with a salesperson has become a fear that we have all grown to like accept. It obviously we're not born with it. I kind of do a tongue-in-cheek name for it. In my book, I call it riptotrustophobia. Meeting with a salesperson is like a phobia. And riptotrustophobia is the fear of meeting with a salesperson or anyone who really sells anything. We all have it. We all have gone through an event in our lives, usually when we're young, where we got ripped off by a salesperson, where we felt terrible talking to a salesperson. It didn't feel good. There was no trust. You got this icky feeling inside you, and that stays with you, and it affects every single time you're ready to meet with another salesperson. I mean, think about it. We walk into a store. We go into a store. It's a large department store, and a sales associate walks up and says, "Hi, can I help you?" What is the first thing that comes out of our mouths without even thinking about it? No, 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 no. I'm just looking. We don't even know why we say it. Well, we say it because of riptotrustophobia. We say it because we don't want to talk to the salesperson, even though we actually need help. We need them to tell us where to find the product that we're looking for. But that is in us. It sits there. And how do we overcome it as a salesperson? This is the perception that people have for salespeople. When you type up a salesperson images on Google, this is what comes up. You don't see professional pictures. You'll see a few of them, but the majority of the salesperson images come up like this. Even the snake oil guy down here at the bottom. That term snake oil salesman is a real term because it happened in the 1920s where these guys at carnivals and things like that, they came up with this water and vinegar and, you know, soda water solution, and they called it snake oil, and they said it cures all of these ailments. And it didn't cure anything, but they sold it and they ripped people off, and you have the term snake oil salesman simply because of that product. So the question becomes, how do we become the salesperson that people want to talk to? That's the biggest issue, because if you become that person, I call it the anti-salesperson, you then become the salesperson that people want to refer, and people like that. It's such an unusual experience to have a good experience with a salesperson that it's like a breath of fresh air, and you're like, oh my God, I just spoke to Joey yesterday, and what a great experience. I'm going to refer him. I'm going to talk about him or her all the time. And it's simply because you're just not being the salesperson that they're expecting. The other big issue with salespeople or solopreneurs or business owners is, how do we ask for the order without feeling like a typical salesperson? So riptotrustophobia not only affects us when we're meeting with a salesperson, but it affects us when we're trying to sell something ourselves. We don't want to be the salesperson that people are afraid of. So what happens? We default to not asking for the order, or being very passive, or not being confident in our product or service to ask the customer to buy. So it affects us as purchasers, and it affects us as sellers, because the concept of the salesman is always there, affecting how we operate our business. So normally I can see faces and stuff, but with StreamYard I can't. But I'm gonna have you guys fill in the blanks of this statement. And I want you to think about this in your mind, and then when we're done, we can chat about this and what you guys came up with. So take your company. Let's say you sell, I don't know, you sell widgets. So I want you to fill in what you do in that blank. So we are not a widget company. And here's the blank I want you to fill in. We are a what company? So think about in your head how you just answered that question. We are not a widget company. We are a what company? Now, for the people who answered it this way, congratulations, but most people don't. This is the answer to that question. You are not a company that sells widgets. You are a customer service company that sells widgets. You are not a painting contractor. You are a customer service company that does painting. If you start to lead with this mindset, that it's all about the customer and not about what you sell, that riptotrustophobia starts to dissipate in not only your mind when you're talking to a customer, but when they're talking to you, because they're realizing that you're leading with customer service and them and not about your product. So keep that in mind, that you are always, first and foremost, a customer service company that happens to sell X, Y, or Z. So let's get into some of my secrets. I did write a book called The 7 Secrets to Selling More by Selling Less. There are 7 secrets that I go over in my book. Today, because of time constraints, we will just talk about what I think are 3 of the 3 critical secrets. They're all critical. They all have their place, and you can utilize them. But these 3, you guys can walk away here today saying, you know what, I'm going to try this tomorrow. You're going to have actionable items that are going to help you kind of switch your selling game and feel more confident when you're talking to a customer. And then that customer is going to feel a lot better talking to you. So secret number 1, the very first secret in the book, kind of sets the stage for everything. And I call it make the switch. And you'll notice these secrets aren't rocket science, but there's stuff that we've never been trained in sales. No one talks about them. When you go to sales training, if there are reps on this call that, work for a company and you went through the company sales training, I guarantee you the training felt unnatural. It didn't feel like you were able to be yourself because they gave you the pitch, or the training focused on just the product and then you had to figure out how to sell it yourself. But the number one thing was always, how can I sell this? I have to sell it, sell it, sell it, sell it. And they never really talk about the customer. So the first thing you need to do is you need to change your mindset as someone who sells your product or service from selling it to helping. If you change your mindset from selling to helping, you will sell a lot more stuff. Here's the thing I want you to remember. You need to sell the problem that you solve, not your product. Okay? So like I mentioned before, let's say I sold Anderson windows for years. Maybe there's some people on this call who even have met me over the years doing that. But I never sold windows. When people would ask me what I sold, I sell the solution to your drafty living room. I sell the solution to your high energy bills. Oh, and by the way, how do I do that? Let me show you my window. See, the reps that walk into the house and say, here's my window, and they just start going through the features of the window without finding out what the actual problem is or what's really bothering the customer, is the rep that's going to close 25 to 30%. The rep that leads with the problem that you're solving is the rep that gets over 40, 50, sometimes 60%. So when you're getting ready to have an appointment with a customer, potential customer, don't think in your head, I have to sell this. Don't think, all right, God, I got to get this proposal. I hope this comes through. I have to do this. That's going to come through in your presentation. Forget all that. Forget the sales, forget your numbers, forget anything. That your number one goal on that call is to help the customer. And sometimes helping the customer means not making the sale. And we can talk about that later. But if you just think about helping, that natural conversation should lead to a sale more often than not, because you're not thinking about selling it. All right, I want everyone to I'm going to do a little test here. Okay, we call this the E test. I want you to take your index finger of your dominant hand, and and I want you to draw a capital E on your forehead. So do that right now. And again, I wish I could see some faces, but I'm assuming everyone's doing that. Draw a capital E on your forehead. What this test does, it subconsciously tests for your empathy. So for the people who drew the capital E facing out, meaning someone looking at you can read it, congratulations, you are really from an empathetic mold. You have empathy inherently in your body. For the people who drew it toward themselves so they can read it, you're not a bad person, but what it does is it indicates that you have to start thinking about empathy a little more. You need to start practicing your empathy. Because what that's saying is, without thinking about it, you drew the E toward yourself for you to read it, which means you're concentrating about selling a lot more than you're concentrating about helping. So don't feel bad if you drew it toward yourself. It's just a little bit of a wake-up call saying, I really need to think about my customer's position, how they feel a little more than I do right now. Okay, secret number 2 is I call this the helping percentage. So everyone on this call knows the term closing percentage. But the problem is, and we all know this because we're all customers at some point in our lives, we're all human beings, nobody wants to be closed. Nobody wants to be sold to. Again, going back to nobody wants to meet with a salesperson. But when we take the mindset of selling to helping, this is actually an actionable item that will help you change that mindset from not only a personal standpoint, but from a company standpoint and the tenor of your company. So I want you to change your terminology in your company and in yourself. Stop asking or thinking about what is your closing percentage, because everybody knows a closing percentage is if you see 10 people and you sell 2, you have a 20% closing percentage. But the term closed, I've always hated that term because to me it's adversarial, it's conquering, it's sort of a negative term in relation to the customer because the customer was closed the customer. So I want you to change your terminology from closing to helping percentage. What is your helping percentage, Peter? How did how many customers did you help this month? I did some training with a solar company prior to COVID, in-person training, which we're very much looking forward to getting back to that. And just like a typical sales room, every company that has a sales team has a sales room, or they call it a war room. Again, another awful term, where you're in the room and that's where you have your sales meetings, and normally have on the board the top leaders, and they usually have the top closers, the closing percentage leaders. Well, the owner of the company took this advice and he changed everything in the room from closing to helping. He changed the computer terminology from closing percentage to helping, and he forbade any rep to say my closing percentage is, and he said, going forward, we're talking about helping percentage. And what happened was they felt more like a customer service company when they did that. They sold solar panels, but they were helping people with their energy bills. And when they said, instead of I closed Mrs. Johnson yesterday for $30,000, they would say, I helped Mrs. Johnson get 7 panels on her roof, and now she's going to save all this money on her electric bill coming up. You see the difference there? They still made the sale, but they felt better about themselves, and the customer felt so much better about the company they're dealing with because they didn't feel like that they were closed. They felt like they were helped. So if you can do this, I highly recommend changing your terminology from closing to helping, and you'll see your entire mindset of your company change. Here's another great thing to do in your office, especially if you have team meetings, whether they're sales meetings or operation meetings or anything that has to do with a group of people in your company. We call this the empty chair method. This actually comes from the world of psychology from hundreds of years ago, where if you're a psychologist and you're meeting with them and you have had a problem with someone in your life, let's say it was your spouse, the psychologist would use this method where they would put an empty chair across from you and say, pretend your spouse is sitting there. what would you like to say to them? And it helped you as a person formulate those words to have that discussion when you're in person. Well, Jeff Bezos of Amazon took that concept and turned it into and brought it into the corporate world. And he did it in a brilliant way. So every meeting that Bezos had with his executive staff or his C-level people, he always put an empty chair at the table. Excuse me. And he would say, ladies and gentlemen, joining us at this meeting today is our Amazon customer. The meeting then would take place as if an Amazon customer was in the room. Now think about that for a second. Think about doing that in your company. Imagine sitting around a table or in a sales meeting, putting a chair at the front of the room or somewhere and saying, this is our ideal customer here today. He's 41 years old. He's married, has 2 kids. Both of them are in high school. He makes $110,000 a year, and he lives in a beautiful house on a cul-de-sac. This is our customer. Imagine how you would conduct the meeting if the customer was there. All your meetings should center around your customer. So why not put them in the room? You then stop saying things like, I closed the customer, or, oh my God, that customer was such a pain in the ass, or anything like this. Things that we say behind closed doors about customers resonate. They start to chip away at the feeling of the company and the customer, and they make them adversarial, where they need to be symbiotic. Everybody you're working as a team, and your customer is part of that. And when you actually do this exercise, it's really amazing, because you just start, everything that comes out of your mouth, you consider the customer before you say it. So I highly recommend doing this exercise. It really helps focus on taking that customer feeling in your company and taking it to the next level when you actually consider the customer every time you speak. Okay, secret 4, I call it selling socially, and that doesn't mean Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn. Selling socially has to do with influence and persuasion. Influence and persuasion are 2 elements of the human brain that are naturally there. We have so many, our brain works in so many ways that we don't know about, that just happen naturally. And there's ways to tap into being influential and persuasive in the human brain without being salesy or without being unethical. You're just understanding how the brain works and actually using that for the customer to feel more comfortable. So when we go back to Aristotle, I call him Awesome Aristotle, because everything he wrote about and talked about is pretty much true today. He mentioned that persuasion occurs, so the act of being persuaded to do something occurs when 3 separate components of communication are triggered. There has to be these 3 components in order for someone to be persuaded to do something. One he called pathos, which is the Greek word for emotion. That's the feeling side of persuasion. One is logos, which is he called data and statistics. For us, that's the features of your product or your service. And then there's ethos, which is credibility and authority, which for us means us as a sales rep or an owner or our company. So if these 3 things are actually spoken about in a conversation with a potential customer, you're supposed to be able to persuade them to purchase your product or service. However, the reason why I think the national closing percentage of all products across the board is like 21% or something really, really bad. The reason why a lot of people don't buy from us is because we don't have the ratio of these things the right way. Most people spend all of their time on data and statistics or the features of their product. They lead with the product, or they lead with the service. This is how great the product is. Look at this. The windows tilt in. Look at this. This has foam, filling in the middle cushion of the couch. All of that stuff. Then, with some of the time they have left, they talk about how great they are and how great their company is. So they spend about 95% of their time on statistics, features, benefits, credibility, all of that stuff, and they forget about emotion. They forget about this. And emotion is the number one thing to concentrate on and think about to actually persuade someone to buy your product or service. And I'm going to give you an example of that. But what you need to do the next time you are talking to someone, especially on Zoom, we have such a great opportunity now on Zoom that you can actually record your sales discussion. You can actually go back and test your pitch, I call it. Test your pitch and see how often you use pathos, you use logos, and you use ethos. And I guarantee you're going to find out that it's way out of skew. Carmine Gallo wrote this amazing book called Talk Like TED. I highly recommend it. What he did was he wanted to find out what made a TED Talk popular, or what made the most popular TED Talks the way they were. What was the reason? So he watched over 2,000 TED Talks, and he used this basis from Aristotle, who said the pathos, logos, and ethos. And he started tabulating the percentage of times that each of the speakers used each one of those components. And he found out that the top 10 TED Talks of all time, millions and millions and millions of views, had the ratio as follows. 15% of their conversation or their speech was about themselves or the company that they work for. 25% was about the features or the statistics that they were talking about. The rest of that talk was all emotion, was all storytelling, was all tapping into how people felt about what they were talking about. This is the ratio as a sales rep or as a business owner you need to get to when talking to a customer. You have to concentrate on emotion. So people say, Allan, what do you mean by emotion? Well, it's actually pretty simple. You just have to get yourself used to doing it. So emotion, number one, is telling stories. Always try to tell stories about other customers or just stories in general to make them feel like you're a normal human being and you're not a salesperson. But here's what I mean by emotion when you're selling a product or service. You want the customer to know what it feels like after they own your product or service. I'm going to say that again. You want your customer to understand what it feels like to own your product or service. And you do that very simply. Here's an example. When I first got into the selling world in my 20s, I sold sunrooms. I had to walk into a house and try to sell a $40,000 sunroom in 2 hours. That's what we had to do. And if you didn't sell it, you lost the customer. There was no follow-up. It was a one and done, churn and burn, they called it. It was an awful way to sell. But once I figured out that I wasn't selling a sunroom, I was selling the feeling of what it's like to be in the sunroom, I became the number one sales rep that they had. Because see, when I went out for training for sunrooms, I went out for 10 days of god-awful sales training. And the first 9 days we learned about the product, how thick the aluminum was, the screws, the rollers, the glass, the thickness of the roof, the R value, all of it. 9 days of this stuff, test after test after test. And day 10 was, okay, this is how you sell it. And basically they said, you got to talk about all this stuff the right way. They never talked about what the customer was actually looking for. So of course, when I was following the pitch that they talked about, I closed about 25%, just like the rest of the country was. But then I realized, like, this is, if I was buying a sunroom, I could care less about the aluminum and the screws and the rollers. So I would do something very simple. I'd walk in and I'd have a conversation. Then I would say, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, imagine what it would feel like sitting on your back deck there, looking out your brand new sunroom, having a cup of coffee, watching the birds. And then I would just shut up. They put themselves in the sunroom that they wanted. They didn't care about the roof. They didn't care about the glass. They cared about sitting out there in a beautiful sunroom, enjoying themselves. And my closing percentage went up to 55%. I introduced emotion, the feeling of what it's going to be like to own the product or service. And if you guys start doing that, I guarantee that's one of the biggest things that take away from this talk today. Start introducing what it's like to own your product or service instead of just talking about it. And you're just going to sell more stuff. You just will. All right, there's three main types of influence and persuasion, and this is comes from Robert Cialdini's book called Influence and Persuasion. He's an amazing professor that has a whole institute on influence and persuasion. The three that I talk about most, we call it authority. In my book, I call it be the expert. Reciprocation. Everybody knows what reciprocation is, but very few people realize how powerful it is. And then social proof, which means customers are more comfortable being part of a tribe. And I'll tell you what that means in a second. I went ahead somehow for some reason. There we go. Right, so authority, I'm missing some slides here. I don't know why it's not there. So authority, I'll give you an example what authority means. Authority is the perception that you are the expert in what you do, even if you may not be exactly an expert. So what I mean by that is people have to perceive you as you know what you're talking about, okay? And there's a lot of ways to do that. You can do that with social media, but the content you post, you can do that obviously in your discussion with the customer. But here's an example I use. So let's say you're at a networking function and you're in the market for lampshades. And you walk up to someone and they introduce themselves and they say, "Hi, I'm Joe Smith. I'm a lampshade consultant." And he gives you his card. You're like, "Great, nice to meet you, Joe." And about an hour later, you walk up and you meet a lady and she says, "Hi, I'm Sally Smith. I'm a senior landscape consultant." And she gives you her card. So you leave the networking function, 2 months goes by and you go, "Oh crap, one day I got to buy these lampshades." So you don't remember Joe or Sally at all, but you go through your cards and you find both of their business cards. And Joe's card says lampshade consultant and Sally's card says senior lampshade consultant. Since you don't remember either one, who are you calling for your lampshades? You're calling Sally almost 100% of the time. Why? Because she positioned herself as the expert by using the word senior. Now, Joe could have been in lampshades for 25 years and Sally could have been in it for 25 minutes. The perception of Sally, how she positioned herself, is that she was the expert and now she's going to get the phone call because of how she positioned herself. So think about how you're doing all of that on your website, on your social media. Position yourself as the expert, not just another sales rep, not just another project consultant. Be the person that they want to talk to from an authority standpoint. Okay, now we're on the right slides. Reciprocation. Reciprocation is literally one of the most powerful emotions that exist. The human brain is wired to reciprocate literally almost 100% of the time when something is given to you. My favorite reciprocation story of all time has to do with the Hare Krishna Society. Now, for those of us who are old like me, the Hare Krishna was a religious society. A lot of people called them a cult back in the 70s. And they would walk around and they would their model of raising money was asking for donations. The problem was they would be dressed in these long gowns. Most of them had their head shaved or had some ponytails with a shaved head. Some of them would be beating some drums, and they'd walk up to people in the street and in airports and they'd say, "Can you donate to the Hare Krishna Society?" They did that for 2 years when they first came to the United States, and their success rate, the people who actually donated, was less than 0.5%. So obviously they're like, we need to do something different. And they got together and they came up with one of the most brilliant ideas in the history of nonprofits. They decided to give people a daisy before they asked for the donation. So I remember this. I remember my parents, we'd be in an airport and I remember a Hare Krishna walking up to us. And what they would do is they would walk up to a person and without saying a word, they would just stick their hand out and hand them a daisy. Pretty much 100% of the time, the person's going to take a flower that you're giving them. And then they would say, "Would you mind donating to the Hare Krishna Society?" You ready for this? Their success rate after they started giving people daisies went up to 98%. So literally almost 100% of the time after they gave someone a daisy, they reciprocated with a donation. And here's the fascinating part. They actually did some studies on this and they filmed some of these guys in the airports and the train stations. You would actually see someone who's angry or like late for a plane or had a terrible experience, and you could just tell that their they're walking fast and they're just not in a good mood, they would walk up to that person, hand them a daisy, ask for a donation, and you would see the person even angrily reach into their pocket and slam money into the bucket and walk away, not saying a word. But that's the power of reciprocation in our brains. It's so powerful that even in an angry state, even if you don't want to talk to that person, they still reciprocated with a donation. So what does this mean from a sales standpoint? Well, it means if you're doing this, it has to be genuine. So what I mean by when I was running appointments in homes, I just had these really cool little tiny notebooks printed, not with the company logo on it, not with anything, just at the very back of it, I had my phone number and my name, but it was really very subtle. And I would genuinely say, I want to thank you for meeting with me today. I really appreciate it. Here's just a token of my thanks. It gives people a warm sensation because it was genuine. I was appreciative of them meeting with me and giving me their their time. And what it does, now I'm not saying that they reciprocate with buying from you, but what it does is it changes it goes back to, okay, now this guy may not be the typical salesperson, but they reciprocate with their attention. They will reciprocate with their time. And that's what you need. Because quite often when someone's meeting with a salesperson, they've got half of their brain somewhere else because they don't want to be talking to you. So do little things like that. Give them a small token, a small gift that's genuine. You cannot give a gift in hopes of getting the sale. The universe knows that it's not going to work. But if you're meeting someone in their home, take the bike out of the driveway, walk up with the package that's sitting on the front lawn. Ask them if you could take in their garbage pails for them. All these little things add up to someone that you're being the anti-salesperson, and it triggers the reciprocation function in your brain, and they will at least give you the time, and then they'll remember you as the person who did that if they're looking at other companies for the same product or service. And then we have social proof. One of the most powerful areas of influence and persuasion that exists, because people feel more comfortable doing something when other people like them did or are doing the same thing. So I have this picture here because basically it's the common occurrence. If you're walking down the street in the city and someone's looking up, you look up because that person's looking up. And then all of a sudden there's 50 people looking up because they're not only curious, but they feel more comfortable looking up because other people are looking up. This is what you need to invoke when you're actually talking with a customer. Invoke social proof. Invoke areas that put them in the same tribe of other people that bought your product or service. So going back to the sunroom example, I would say, yes, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, we have 4 other jobs in this town very similar to the sunroom that you're considering. Okay. Or, you know what? I sold 2 sunrooms last week to a doctor just like you. Doing these little subtle things, putting them in the same group that they're in, is going to make them feel much more comfortable making the purchase. People don't want to feel like they're the first person doing things. That's when you use phrases like, most of my customers do X, Y, and Z. A lot of my customers do this. Some people would say, well, should I get the hinge door or the sliding door? Most of my customers get the sliding door. That's going to make them feel comfortable. You know what? I'll go with the sliding door. I don't want to be the person who's doing the hinge door when no one else is doing it. There are so many ways to do this, and the key is making the customer feel comfortable in a genuine way. So testimonials is really the #1 way to do this, but people use testimonials wrong. You can't have a testimonial that has just one name. Everyone sees a testimonial that has one name and you don't trust it, you don't believe it. If it's a testimonial, why doesn't someone have their full name? The other thing is, if you are dealing with local people or even international people, whatever, you have to have testimonials from their geographic region. You can't have, if I'm talking to someone in Rhode Island and I say, oh, you know, this guy bought this washing machine in Topeka, Kansas, that it doesn't invoke any social proof whatsoever. But if I say someone in Providence bought these 3 washing machines and you're in Providence, guess what? You're going to feel like, oh, okay, I'm not the first person in Providence who's about to buy this product. So use full names, use nearby towns or states, depending on your product or service, and then start showing pictures or photographs of similar jobs in your area, or similar products in your area, or occupations. Here's a quick story of social proof. I did some training with this gentleman who worked for one of those big box men's warehouse kind of places, like a lot of suits in it. He sold men's clothing, and he wanted help with his sales. And I trained him on social proof in that situation, and it really worked well, because what he did was, when someone would walk into the store, immediately, if you've ever been in one of those stores, you get overwhelmed because there's 5,000 suits all hanging in one spot. And you're like, oh my God, what do I do? So he would immediately walk up to this person, start a conversation. They say, you know what? Most guys who look like you, who are 6'1" and kind of slender, they buy one of these 5 suits over here. Now, all of a sudden, the overwhelming feeling of 5,000 suits now is narrowed down to 5. And now the guy feels really comfortable because, okay, whew, one of these 5 suits, people like me, people look like me buy these suits. And the guy became the #1 sales rep by a long margin, because he just took people to a comfortable level, or a comfortable area where other people that look like them bought those types of suits. And again, I've been kind of talking about this: professions, occupations. If you're a contractor, or someone who does house cleaning, or anything that has to do with stuff that's physical, use the same house and colors and styles. Use the same company types. If you sell software to nail salons, don't use car dealerships as your example of your software. So make sure you're not being generic. You're being very specific in your social proof and in your testimonials. And again, it goes back to the customer feeling comfortable with you, the customer looking at you as, you know what, this person really cares about me. I feel very, very comfortable buying something from this customer. Ultimately, the feeling that you want your customer to have is not this one. This is the feeling that most people think about salespeople. They're reaching around, they're giving you a hug, but they're taking money out of your back pocket. Ultimately, you want your customers to be doing this after they do business with you. And that is the end of my talk. There you go. Am I back? Can you see me?
I can see you. That was fantastic.
Awesome.
That was fantastic, Allan. I can see why you have been such a successful consultant, solutions provider.
Thank you.
Author. Your social proof is indeed really evident. I got a lot out of that presentation.
Right.
I had a couple of questions, and I would invite our listeners and viewers to put their questions in the chat box. And a few things popped out for me as I was watching your excellent presentation. The first is, what do you suggest people use as their titles on a card? Now, you talked about, lampshade consultant, senior lampshade consultant, but a lot of people go through these mental gymnastics to say, okay, I'm not going to put the word sales on my card. I'm not a sales executive, a sales consultant. Business development, that kind of means the same thing. Oh, okay, they're going to try to do something, or they want to, a donation, or, different terms evoke sort of the same feeling when you present your title. What do you counsel your clients to use as a way to describe themselves?
Well, don't be afraid of the term sales, because that's what you are. You are selling something, and you can put consultant or project consultant or whatever you want. But unless you're just starting out, I would, some people use the word, experienced sales director, or things like that, that you just want to come up with a title that gives you a sense of authority. And again, without, you don't want to lie. You're not going to say you're the senior director when you're not. But the term, like, let's just say use project consultant. That's boring. That's not memorable. Everyone is a project consultant. So come up with something a little different. You said mental gymnastics. You got to be a little creative here, because again, people are not going to, especially when we get back to the business card world, of like, okay, here's my business card, and they go back and look at the card, do you want the card to then trigger their memory of you? So you have to come up with something that's going to do that. And, I used to, on my card, I was, God, I'm forgetting what I was. I think I was a senior sales designer or something like that, where I had sales in there, but it was also like, it was more of a consultative approach as opposed to just project consultant. So there's really no one way to do it, except that you want it to be memorable without being, incorrect, but you also want it to invoke some sort of authority that you really know what you're talking about. And the generic terms, avoid generic terms as much as you can.
That was a great answer. I'm also interested in the Hare Krishna example that you presented, with Daisy. And I'm wondering if that tactic still works, or did it work because it was back then, it was in the 70s, it was kind of new. Because I'm thinking about the experience of walking through a mall as an example, and the kiosks set up in the middle of the mall, and you walk by and somebody wants to give you a hand cream or a this or a that, or they approach you out of the blue. They kind of get into the middle of your space there, and you're like, no, I don't want it, I don't want it, I don't want it. And you walk through the concourse, and like 10 people are trying to give you things, thrust it in your head. So I'm wondering, is there a fine art to doing that? And does it still work?
Yeah, in the situation you're describing, walking through a mall or a trade show or things like that, it doesn't invoke reciprocation because it's not genuine. They're handing you something because they want to sell you something. That is true. What the Hare Krishnas did very, very well is, if they didn't get a donation, they still thank the person. I think they said something like, "Have a blessed day" or something like that. When you're meeting with someone, specifically one-on-one, that's where it works. Again, it has to be genuine. If you walk in, you give someone, a giant bouquet of flowers, and, it's obvious that you're doing it because you want their business, it's not going to work. But if you're just genuine about meeting with them, saying, I really appreciate your time. Here's a little token. I made these books for my customers. Here you go. And then you just have a conversation. But what you're talking about, the mall, the trade shows, those don't work because they're not genuine. There's literally an ulterior motive to them. If the customer senses, or the potential customer senses, an ulterior motive, it's not going to work. So reciprocation has to be genuine. And if you start from a foundation of being genuine, then it will work more often than it won't. And you'll feel good about it too.
That makes a ton of sense. Audra is providing some feedback, and hey, Audra, how you doing? Long time no see. And Audra is a great solutions consultant, but she says, I have a story about gifts. Met with a prospect in June of 2019 and gave a bar of chocolate that was branded with our company logo as a thank you for meeting with me. The client was finally ready to buy from me just this week and mentioned the chocolate. So it was memorable. And I would just say, as a PS, Audra, it was genuine too, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Great story.
Yeah. If it comes from a genuine foundation, it's going to work more often than not. And like I said, it don't think it's going to lead to a sale all the time, but it leads to them giving you your time, or it leads to them referring you if they can't afford your product or service, or are not ready to buy your product or service. It leaves you in a good position that again, you go back to the anti-salesperson. You don't want to be this person who's just trying to sell them something just like everybody else. It kind of just moves you a little out of that lane and oh, you know what? I remember that guy. He left me that nice notebook. I'm ready to do some windows. Let's look for his card. I'm going to give him a call. It's that powerful. It stays in your brain.
Isn't it funny how the term typical salesperson is embedded in everybody's brain?
Yep.
And the fact that it comes to mind so quickly shows the hurdles that we all have to climb to really turn that notion around. Which leads me to another question. Do you think the consumer The customer is onto this whole notion, like you can spot it a mile away. Like, okay, they're taking me through a sales funnel. They're trying to empathize. They are trying to say, try to figure out what the objections might be. They're trying to now, bring me through this pipeline where I'm going to have no choice but to say, if I said yes to all those questions, then the ultimate question is, okay, well, then you must want to buy my product, X, Y, and Z. The question is, the consumer, the customer, they kind of know, right? They kind of know what's happening.
Yeah, this is the most savvy in the history of the world. Consumers have never been more savvy, have never been more educated. They do so much research. The last study I saw was, I think 98 point something % of purchases start online, meaning they're doing research before they're talking to you. So if you think that you're the one who has all the answers to their questions, you're wrong. You cannot come. So what's his name? Dan Pink wrote a book called, the name is escaping me right now, but he talked about caveat emptor and caveat emptor. And what it meant was when before the internet, the salesperson was in charge. They were in charge of you. If you had to buy something, you had to go to the salesperson and you had to get all the information from that. So they were in charge. They could tell you whatever they wanted. Now the customer is in charge. And if you don't realize that as a salesperson or a business owner, you're going to be way behind the 8 ball. You have to know that the customer is prepared to talk to you and you're just there to facilitate helping them rather than just talking to them or talking at them and putting them through the sales pitch. Because once they, like you said, Laurie, once they figure that out, like, oh, here we go. Here comes the trial closes. Here comes the objection handling technique. Here comes the closing technique. They're too smart. Just be a human being. Seriously, be a human being. And like I said, that's how I try to make it very, very easy. Once you start helping them, it almost becomes easier to sell because at the end, they like you enough. You didn't take them through that funnel. You didn't take them through that pitch. And then you're like, hey, you want to get started? It sounds like this is what's really going to work for you. Is going to solve your problems. Why don't we get started? It sometimes becomes as simple as that. I don't want to simplify it to the point because I know there's a lot of people out there struggling with sales and like, oh yeah, right, that's going to work. But it really does, because think about it from your customer standpoint all the time. If they are feeling comfortable and not feeling like you're taking them through this canned, ABC thing that you've been trained, you're going to have a lot easier time selling.
So you don't have a formula that you employ. You just sort of, lead.
Yeah, I mean, I have the 7 secrets are there to use almost like tools in a toolbox. I always will employ 3 or 4 of them almost every single time, but you don't have to, because one of the things I talk about in the book is figuring out what kind of customer is in front of you. All right, what's his personality that I'm looking at? Okay, this person is an analytical person, so I know I'm not going to use these secrets because they're not going to work. So you get all of these different sales formulas that are out there. There's so many. There's Sandler, there's spin selling, there's all these different things, which is great. But if it becomes a formula that you're thinking about in your head, and you're trying to follow a sequence, you become much more robotic and not human. So the way I have the 7 secrets set up is like to be very natural, where I'm going to use social proof, but I'm going to use it in an appropriate time during the conversation. I'm not always going to use it at the beginning. I'm not always going to use it at the end. I'm going to use it whenever it's appropriate in the conversation. I'm going to use reciprocation when it's appropriate. So the 7 secrets are there to use, but you don't have to follow a sequence to use them, which is what I think makes it more effective, because it takes away the formulaic, rigidness that some of these systems have. And it makes you just be a little more of a human being. And once you start doing them, they all come very naturally. And you'll start thinking in your head ahead of time, oh, I'm going to start talking about social proof now because I have to mention these other nail salons that are doing business with this software or something like that. I talk about body language in the book. I talk about, how to tell stories properly. There's different ways to do that. So, but there's no A to B formula, because then that would kind of put you back in the salesperson category.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting way to summarize that. I love that. So Stephen says, "Hey, thank you, Alan and Laurie. Great presentation. Actually, I have an 11 o'clock sales call, and we'll be using these new
There we
tools
go.
up. So, it's
Good
one
luck, Stephen.
moment, Stephen. Yeah, good luck. Let us know how it went." Backing up to Dr. Carmen Aguilar. She is a member of the board of directors of the Chamber and is the new dean of continuing education at Providence College. And she is a serious continuing education practitioner. She loves it. She takes every course known to mankind to continue to refine her professional development portfolio. So she is saying to you, Alan, great topic. I love this. But she has a specific question about reciprocation. She says, as a consultant and expert trainer, could you share reciprocation examples when developing opportunities and new partnerships with a potential customer? So she just threw you a little social proof in the question. So she's wondering about reciprocation.
Well, I love this question, and thank you, Karma, for bringing it up because the reciprocation examples I used quite a bit was face to face, and hopefully we're getting back to that fairly soon. But in the world of Zoom, when we don't have the ability to be face to face and we're doing our sales calls online, the best way to do some reciprocation is to not be a salesperson, but to send information to them that they might find valuable. So what I would do is if I had a sales call for training, a few days later, I would, I'd look up an article and about the industry that they're in and say, hey, Peter, I just found this article surfing the internet and I thought you'd find it interesting. And I would just email it. Nothing about the presentation, nothing about the proposal. You just send them something that makes them realize you're thinking about them. It's a really good follow-up method as well. So it helps with your follow-up. It invokes reciprocation because they see that you gave them something that you're hoping that they find valuable. It could be a blog article. It could be a video. Videos are good. I saw this funny video, Peter, thought you'd, based on our conversation, I thought you'd have a chuckle at it. Humor is great. If you can find something on YouTube that they would find funny, that will invoke some senses of reciprocation because what it'll do is it's not only a very non-salesy follow-up, the follow-up was, the sentence of, hi, Peter, just following up to find out if, everybody does that. Nobody reads those emails. But if you send an email that says, hey, Peter, I just saw this hilarious video on YouTube that reminded me of our conversation. Have a great day. Guess what? They're looking at that, and that is going to trigger them to say, oh, I got to get back to Alan because, we had this proposal. I got to let him know yes or no. You separate yourself from any possible competition by doing things like that. So in an online world, I try to send them some valuable things in an email. I don't like to send a gift in the mail because it comes across as disingenuous usually when you do that. So you got to be careful with that, but when you get to face, that's when you can start doing the genuine type of stuff. So, use your online abilities the best you can, while we're still in the pandemic mode. I hope that answers your question, Carmen.
Thank you, Carmen. That was a great question. And, there are so many things, so many creative ways in which we can be creative as human beings, as you point out, Alan. That's, the fundamental truth is we all want to react and relate to people who are genuine and provide sort of a simple way to interact with you. Let me close. We have a couple of minutes left, but one of the things that you touched on midway through, and I think it's a gold mine of mindset stuff, is, how do you want to feel? I think we all, when we're dissecting different opportunities or looking at things or thinking about buying something or engaging a consultant or a coach or, you name it. If you can put yourself in the mind of the customer, as you point out, and tap into how do you want to feel and just sort of, supplant what they might be thinking by delivering, what does the customer really want to feel? And you use the sunroom example. That's the empathy, that's the feeling, that's the emotion, and it's almost a shortcut to success, right?
Yeah, you have to be empathetic. You have to put yourself in your customer's shoes. You have to understand why they don't want to meet with you, why that the term sales gives people, like a shiver, because traditionally salespeople have not, they're always in it for themselves, and they still are. And here's a quick example. You go on LinkedIn, how many unsolicited messages do you get on LinkedIn every day trying to sell you Bitcoin or trying to set up an appointment? They keep perpetuating the perception that salespeople are in it for themselves, and unfortunately most of them are. So when you become the salesperson that's in it for the customer, that's when you start to really, really shine, and your career will start to take off when you do that.
So it's a multiple opportunities to sort of finesse things, and it's definitely not easy. And I give you a lot of credit, Allan, for breaking it down in such a truly genuine and understandable way. And a lot of folks are writing in saying, great topic. They want the slide deck. So just to reiterate, yes, we will put this up on our YouTube channel. Also, it will be on profchamber.com, and the links are readily available, and you will be able to look at this presentation again and also have access to the slides. So with that, Allan, any final comments before we leave you?
No, just if anybody wants to say hello to me, you go to my website. It's Allan Langer. It's allanger.com, ALLANGER.com. You can send me a note there. You can find me on LinkedIn. I love to chat with people. I hope I can become connections with all of you on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn every day, 40 hours a day. So, but say hello. I'd like to meet everyone who was on the talk. I know we had a great group today. So it was a pleasure being here. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, Amy says, this is great. Thank you so much. Harley says, thank you. I love it. Carmen loved your answer, so she's really happy. Rita, absolutely, thumbs up. And Riley, Deb, Jose, Chris, Alice, Lori, all writing in saying, great job, Allan. So
awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Love the feedback, and thanks everybody for tuning in to episode number 120 of Chamber TV. We'll be back again soon.